The afternoon sun cut low across 125th Street, Harlem, on a humid summer day in 1962. An Italian syndicate enforcer, bold with Genovese backing, stepped forward in the open crowd and delivered a sharp, open-handed slap across Bumpy Johnson's face. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Everyone froze, expecting blood, expecting the King of Harlem to draw iron and paint the sidewalk red. But Bumpy stood motionless, eyes steady, the insult hanging in the air like smoke from a fresh barrel. No one knew yet that the man who struck him would never pull the trigger on the gun still holstered at his side. Harlem moved the way it always moved at 3:20 in the afternoon. Quick steps, low voices, the rhythm of a people who had learned to read every shift in the wind. The Apollo's marquee still carried last night's headliner in fading red letters. Street vendors called out iced sodas and roasted peanuts. Ladies in summer dresses fanned themselves with church programs. Children darted between legs, chasing bottle caps. And through it all walked Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, coat open despite the heat, brim low, pace unhurried. He never rushed, never had to. 2 blocks down, near the corner of Lenox, the crowd parted without being told. Men nodded once, sharp and respectful. Women lowered their eyes just enough to show they knew who passed. A runner named Junie slipped a folded paper into Bumpy's palm without breaking stride. Numbers for the day, clean and tight. Bumpy tucked it inside his breast pocket, fingers brushing the outline of the .38 he carried low on his hip. Not for show. Never for show. Then the Italian appeared. He came from the passenger side of a black Buick Super that had eased to the curb 30 seconds earlier. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie, collar open against the heat. Hair slicked straight back, skin the color of old olive oil. He carried himself like a man who believed the sidewalk belonged to him the moment he stepped onto it. Behind him, the driver stayed behind the wheel, engine idling, eyes scanning mirrors. 2 more men waited half a block back, muscle, not decision-makers. The slap was meant to be seen, meant to be remembered. Bumpy noticed him the way a lion notices a jackal that has wandered too close to the pride. He did not slow. He did not speed up. The Italian closed the last 5 feet in 3 long strides and planted himself directly in Bumpy's path. "Johnson," the man said, voice flat, accent thick with Brooklyn and something older, something Sicilian that had not quite washed out. "You been slow payin' what you owe. Mr. Genovese sends regards." Bumpy stopped. Not because he was blocked, because he chose to. The street felt the change before it saw it. Conversations hushed. Footsteps faltered. A child stopped chasing his cap mid-spin. The Italian smiled, small and sharp. "He says you forgot who runs things up here now." Bumpy regarded him the way one studies a painting one does not particularly like. No anger in the eyes. No fear. Only calm, deep as still water. The Italian raised his right hand, open, deliberate, and brought it across Bumpy's left cheek with a sound like a wet towel snapped against stone. The crack traveled faster than sound should. Heads turned. Mouths opened but made no noise. A woman dropped her shopping bag. Apples rolled into the gutter. Junie, 10 feet away, took 1 half-step forward before a single raised finger from Bumpy stopped him cold. The Italian stepped back 1 pace, still smiling, waiting for the explosion he had paid good money to provoke. The .38 under his left armpit pressed against the fabric of his suit. He flexed the fingers of his slapping hand, proud of the red bloom already rising on Bumpy's cheek. Bumpy did not touch his face. He did not speak. He simply looked at the man. The silence stretched 1 second, 2, 3. Long enough for the crowd to feel the weight of it. Long enough for the Italian's smile to falter at the edges. Long enough for the first bead of sweat to appear at his temple despite the breeze. Bumpy tilted his head, just a fraction. Enough to let the light catch the scar that ran along his jawline. A souvenir from years earlier, from a different man who had also believed he could strike first and walk away whole. "You finished?" Bumpy asked. Voice low, almost gentle. The Italian blinked. The question was not what he expected. He had rehearsed the follow-up. More words, more threats, maybe the flash of steel if Johnson reached. But this was nothing. No roar, no draw, just 4 soft words that landed heavier than the slap. The Italian recovered, squared his shoulders. Tell your people the VIG goes up 20%. Next week. Same time, same place. Or we come collect in ways you won't like. Bumpy nodded once. Small, polite, the way one acknowledges a weather report. Then he stepped around the man as though he were no more than a lamppost and continued walking toward the corner of 126th. The crowd exhaled. Not all at once. In pieces. A murmur here. A whisper there. Eyes followed Bumpy's back, then flicked to the Italian, who stood rooted, smile gone, hand still tingling from the contact. The Buick's driver leaned out the window. Vinny, let's go. The man called Vinny turned, slow, like a man waking from a dream he did not understand. He climbed back into the car. The Buick pulled away, tires whispering against asphalt, disappearing south toward the bridge. Bumpy kept walking. Behind him, Harlem began to speak in the language it knew best. Not shouts, not panic, but the quiet relay of information that moves faster than Western Union. By the time Bumpy reached the stoop of the building where he kept his office, every block between 110th and 145th already knew. The Italian had slapped the king in daylight, and the king had not slapped back. Junie caught up first, breathing hard, eyes wide. You want me to? Bumpy raised the same finger that had stopped him before. Junie closed his mouth. Bumpy climbed the steps, coat swaying. At the top he paused, looked back down the street where the crowd still stood in loose clusters, staring after him. He touched the brim of his hat. Barely a gesture, but every man and woman who saw it understood. Not yet. Inside, the hallway smelled of old wood and fresh coffee. Nat Pettigrew waited at the door to the back room, arms folded, face carved from mahogany. He had heard already. Everyone had. Bumpy removed his hat, hung it on the rack. The red mark on his cheek had darkened to the color of raw liver. Nat spoke first. They think that buys them Harlem? Bumpy crossed to the window, looked down at the street. They think it buys them time. He turned. The calm had not left his eyes. But something else lived there now. Something patient, something ancient. Get word to every runner, every banker, every woman who works the phones. No one moves product. No one collects. No one speaks to any Italian until I say different. Nat nodded once. And Nat. Yeah. Bump. Tell them I'm not angry. Nat's brow lifted. Tell them I'm disappointed. The older man almost smiled, almost. Then he left to deliver the message. Bumpy sat at the desk, opened the day's ledger, began to read numbers as though nothing had happened. Outside, Harlem waited. Not for vengeance. Not for war. For direction. And in the silence that followed the slap, direction was already forming, slow, certain, unstoppable. The streetlights came on an hour later. Children went inside. Vendors packed up. The Apollo's next show let out to applause. Somewhere across the river, in a smoke-filled room on Mulberry Street, Vinny recounted the story to men who nodded and smiled, believing the matter settled. They were wrong. Bumpy Johnson had not drawn his gun. He had done something far more dangerous. He had remembered every face that watched, and every one of them would remember his. Word moved the way night moves across Harlem, slow at first, then everywhere at once. By the time the streetlights hummed to life, every stoop, every barbershop mirror, every kitchen window that faced the avenue carried the same quiet sentence. They slapped Bumpy, and he let it stand. Not he took it. Not he backed down. He let it stand. In the back booth of the Red Rooster, old men hunched over glasses of rye and spoke in murmurs that carried no heat. Seen worse, one said, voice like dry leaves. Back in 38, when Dutch Schultz thought he owned the numbers. Another man, younger but already gray at the temples, shook his head. Dutch got bullets. This one walked away smiling. The first man sipped, eyes on the amber swirl in his glass. That's the difference. Bumpy ain't Dutch, and we ain't them. Across the street, in the apartment above the shoe repair shop, Mrs. Clara Evans stood at her window with the curtain pulled just wide enough to see without being seen. She had watched the whole thing from 3 stories up, had seen the Italian's hand rise, had seen the flash of red on Bumpy's cheek, had seen the way the king never once raised his own hand. She turned to her daughter, 16 and already too knowing for her years. "You tell your brother," Clara said, voice steady. "No running numbers tomorrow. Not a single slip. Not till Mr. Johnson says." The girl frowned. "But Mama, we need." Clara's look stopped the words cold. "We need what he says we need. That's how it works." Down on 135th, in the basement of Mount Olivet Baptist, the deacons were already gathering even though prayer meeting wasn't till Thursday. Reverend Pointer sat at the head of the long table, hands folded, listening as runner after runner came in off the street with the same report. No one raised a voice. No one had to. "He didn't draw," one said. "Didn't need to," another answered. Pointer nodded once. "Then neither do we. Tell every family in the congregation. Stay home tomorrow evening. No corners. No dice games in the alley. Harlem holds still till he moves." The runners left without argument. They understood. This wasn't fear. This was discipline. By 9 o'clock, the message had reached the edges of Bumpy's world. The numbers banks on 8th Avenue locked their doors early. The women who answered the phones in back rooms told their girls to take the night off. Even the policy slips that usually changed hands under hats and in coat pockets stayed in pockets. Harlem did not stop breathing. It simply held its breath in perfect rhythm. Inside the office on 126th, Bumpy sat alone at the desk. The ledger lay open but untouched. A single lamp burned low. Nat Pettigrew stood by the door, arms crossed, watching his friend the way a man watches a slow-burning fuse. "You really gonna let that stand?" Nat asked after 20 minutes of silence. Bumpy lifted his eyes. The mark on his cheek had settled into a dull purple bruise, the shape of 4 fingers and a thumb. He touched it once, lightly, then let his hand fall. "I already did," he said. Nat exhaled through his nose. "They'll read it as weakness. They'll read what I want them to read." Bumpy rose, crossed to the window. Below, the street looked almost ordinary. Couples walking arm in arm, a patrol car rolling slow, headlights cutting the dark. But Nat knew better. Every shadow held eyes tonight. Every pair of eyes belonged to someone who had seen the slap. And every one of them was waiting. Bumpy spoke without turning. "How many runners we got working the blocks between 110th and 145th? 87? Give or take. How many of them saw it?" "Most. Words faster than they are." Bumpy nodded. "And how many of them still came to drop their slips tonight?" Nat paused. "None." A small sound escaped Bumpy. Not quite a laugh, more like the memory of one. "That's the answer." He turned back to the room. "They didn't come because they're scared. They didn't come because they respect what I built. Respect don't vanish with one hand. It just waits to see what you do with it." Nat rubbed his jaw. "So we wait. We wait," Bumpy said. "But we don't sit idle." He returned to the desk, opened a drawer, removed a small black notebook, the one he never let anyone else touch. He flipped to a blank page and began to write. Names, addresses, amounts owed, dates. Not the public ledger. The private one. The one that remembered favors, slights, promises kept and broken. Nat watched him write. "You mapping the whole Italian side?" "Not yet," Bumpy said. "Just reminding myself who's already in debt to Harlem." He closed the book, slid it back into the drawer. "Tomorrow morning, first light, send Junie to every banker. Tell them the cut stays the same. No increase. No decrease. And tell them if any Italian shows up asking questions. They answer polite, then send him to me." Nat's brow lifted. "You inviting them back?" "I'm reminding them where the door is." Bumpy stood, stretched once, slow and deliberate. The bruise caught the lamplight and looked almost regal, like a mark of office rather than insult. "Get some rest, Nat. Tomorrow's gonna be loud even if nobody says a word." Nat lingered at the door. You sure you don't want somebody on that guinea tonight? Just in case he gets brave again. Bumpy looked at him, then really looked. The calm in his eyes had deepened into something colder, something final. If he gets brave again, Bumpy said, he'll wish he'd stayed home tonight. Nat held the gaze a moment longer, then nodded and left. Alone again, Bumpy crossed to the small radio on the shelf, turned the dial until he found the late-night station out of Newark. Sarah Vaughan came through soft and clear, singing about foolish things. He listened for a while, standing in the middle of the room, hands in his pockets. Outside, Harlem kept its vigil. On 116th, a group of boys who usually ran dice till dawn sat on the stoop instead, passing a bottle of nehi and speaking in low tones. He didn't hit back, one said. Didn't have to, another answered. You see his eyes? Man looked like he was already counting the funeral flowers. They laughed, but the laugh died quick. Further uptown, in a brownstone on Edgecombe, a woman named Esther who had once worked as Bumpy's bookkeeper sat at her kitchen table counting out rent money. She stopped, looked at the calendar on the wall, then at the bruise she knew was on his face even though she hadn't seen it. She whispered to the empty room, "You better be right about this, Ellsworth." By midnight the streets had emptied. Windows went dark. Radios clicked off. Harlem slept or pretended to, but sleep was thin. Everyone knew tomorrow would bring the next move. Not gunfire. Not yet. Something quieter. Something heavier. Because Bumpy Johnson had not struck back in the street. He had done something far more permanent. He had let Harlem decide what came next. And Harlem, every barber, every mother, every runner, every elder, had already decided. They would wait. They would watch. And when the moment came, they would answer in the only language power truly understands. Silence. Absolute. Unbreakable. Across the river the city changed color and cadence. Mulberry Street smelled of fresh espresso and old cigar smoke even at 11 o'clock at night. The social club sat low and unassuming between a butcher and a funeral parlor. Green awning, frosted glass door, no sign. Inside, the air was thick with men who spoke in half sentences and understood the rest. Vinny sat at the round table near the back, still in the same suit from the afternoon. The slap hand rested on the green felt, knuckles faintly red. He nursed a small glass of grappa, rolling it between his palms like worry beads. Around him the room held its usual rhythm. Cards snapping, low laughter, the clink of ice in heavy tumblers. But tonight the laughter came slower. Ice kept drifting to Vinny, then away. Frank Costello's consigliere, a thin man named Tommy Three Fingers Russo, leaned in from the head of the table. He wore rimless glasses and a perpetual half-smile that never reached the eyes. Everyone called him Three Fingers even though he still had all 10, old nickname, old story, no one asked anymore. "So," Tommy said, voice soft, almost kind, "you slapped him." Vinny nodded once. Right on Lenox, middle of the street. Crowd saw everything. Tommy sipped his espresso. And nothing. Vinny's shoulders lifted. He just stood there, looked at me like I was a kid who dropped his ice cream, said, "You finished," then walked around me like I wasn't even there. A ripple of quiet amusement moved through the men at the table. Someone muttered "Stronzo" under his breath. Another chuckled into his drink. Tommy did not laugh. He set the small cup down with care. "He draw on you?" "No." "Call for his boys?" "No." "Threaten you at all?" Vinny shook his head. Just that one question. Then he kept walking. Tommy studied Vinny's face for a long beat. "You sure he wasn't carrying?" "He always carries. Everyone knows that." But he didn't reach. The room absorbed that. A man in the corner, older, face like cracked leather, spoke without looking up from his cards. "Maybe he's getting soft. Been a long time since he did real time." Another voice answered quick. "Or maybe he knows something we don't." Tommy raised a hand. The room stilled. "Genovese wants the vig up 20, Tommy said. "We delivered the message. Johnson heard it. If you don't pay by next week, we send a crew to collect." Not a discussion. Collection. Vinny leaned forward. You want me to go back? Tommy considered it. Not yet. Let him sweat a few days. See if he sends a runner with an envelope. If he don't, he shrugged one shoulder. Then yes, you go back. Bring 2 boys. Make it clean. No theatrics. Just the money. Vinny smiled now, small, satisfied. He'll pay. They always pay when they realize the street ain't theirs anymore. Tommy did not return the smile. He's been running numbers up there 20 years. Longer than most of us been made. Don't assume he scares easy. Vinny waved it off. He didn't scare today. That's the point. He froze. I saw it in his eyes. The older man at the end of the table laid his cards down flat. You saw what you wanted to see, kid. I remember when Vito first sent word to Harlem. 38, maybe 39. Johnson met the emissary at a restaurant on 7th. Ordered steak. Ate it slow while the man talked. Never once raised his voice. By the time the check came, the emissary was the one sweating. Vito backed off for 3 years. Vinny's jaw tightened. Different time. Different players. Maybe, the old man said. Or maybe the same game, just different pieces. Tommy cut in before Vinny could answer. Enough history. We got business. He turned to a younger man near the door. Anthony, barely 25, already trusted with collections. You and Joey take a ride up tomorrow. No trouble. Just watch. See who's moving product. See if the corners look nervous. Report back. Anthony nodded. Yes, sir. Tommy looked back at Vinny. You did good today. Public. Clean. Message sent. Now we wait for the reply. Vinny drained his grappa. Reply's gonna be an envelope. Or his head on a plate. More quiet laughter. Tommy allowed a thin smile this time. The room returned to its rhythm. Cards, drinks, low talk. Vinny leaned back, loosened his collar. He felt the weight of the .38 against his ribs and smiled to himself. The slap still tingled in his palm like a good memory. He pictured Johnson's face again. Still unreadable, and told himself it was fear he had seen. Had to be fear. Across the bridge, in a smoke-filled room on 126th, Bumpy sat with 3 men he trusted more than blood. Junie stood by the window, young and restless, fingers tapping his thigh. Nat Pettigrew sat opposite, arms folded. And old Madame Stephanie St. Clair, retired now but never really gone, sat in the high-back chair she always took when she visited. She wore a silk scarf and carried a cane she did not need. Her eyes were sharp as ever. They think you're weak, she said. No preamble. Never any with her. Bumpy met her gaze. They think what they need to think. She tapped the cane once on the floor. You let a guinea put his hand on you in daylight, in front of every soul who pays rent in this city. And you did nothing. I did everything, Bumpy said quietly. Madame Stephanie studied him. Then slowly she nodded. You always did play the long hand. Junie couldn't hold it in anymore. They're laughing at us right now. In Little Italy. Drinking and laughing. Let them, Bumpy said. Junie's voice rose half an octave. They'll come back. They'll want more. They will, Bumpy agreed. And when they do, Harlem will answer. Nat spoke then, calm as stone. You shutting down the game was smart. They'll feel it in their pockets before they feel it anywhere else. No slips moving means no money moving. They'll notice. Madame Stephanie leaned forward. And when they come asking why? Bumpy's answer was soft. We tell them the truth. Business is slow. Happens sometimes. She almost smiled. And when they push? Then we push back, Bumpy said. But not with guns. Not yet. With nothing. Junie frowned. Nothing. Nothing, Bumpy repeated. No product. No collection. No conversation. They want 20%. They get 0. They want respect. They get silence. Nat exhaled slowly. They'll send muscle. They will, Bumpy said. And muscle needs money to eat. Money comes from the game. Game's closed. Madame Stephanie tapped her cane again. Slower this time, thoughtful. You're betting on loyalty. I'm not betting, Bumpy said. I built it. She looked at him a long moment. Then she rose, slow and regal. "I'll speak to the old women on Sugar Hill. They still listen. They'll make sure no one breaks rank." Bumpy stood with her. "Thank you, Stephanie." She touched his arm, light, brief. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when their hands are empty and their mouths are shut." She left without another word. The room felt smaller after she was gone. Junie looked at Bumpy. "You really think they'll fold?" Bumpy crossed to the desk, opened the private ledger again. "They already started." He turned a page. "Their runners were seen on 125th this evening. Watching, waiting for slips that never came. They went back empty-handed." Nat's eyes narrowed. "They'll report it." "They will," Bumpy said. "And tomorrow they'll report the same thing. And the day after." Junie finally exhaled. "So we starve them out." "We remind them," Bumpy corrected, "who feeds this city, and who can stop feeding it." He closed the ledger. "Go home, Junie. Get rest. Tomorrow you walk the blocks. Smile. Say good morning. Act like everything's normal." Junie hesitated at the door. "And if someone asks about the slap?" Bumpy looked at him, calm, certain. "Tell them the king's still standing." Junie left. Nat stayed. After a while he spoke. "You're playing chess while they're playing checkers." Bumpy sat again. "They think they took a piece today." Nat nodded once. "They did." "No," Bumpy said. "They exposed their hand." He touched the bruise on his cheek, almost absently. "Every man who watched me take that slap without answering. Every woman who saw it from her window. Every child who heard the story tonight. They're all part of this now." Nat understood. Loyalty ain't just earned. It's witnessed. Bumpy's eyes met his. And witnessed loyalty lasts longer than fear. Outside, the city slept. Across the river, men drank and planned and smiled at their own cleverness. They did not yet know that Harlem had already begun to close around them. Not with fists or steel, but with something far heavier. Silence. And in that silence, the miscalculation grew. The next morning Harlem woke slow and deliberate, the way a river wakes after a long freeze. No one shouted orders. No one ran through the blocks with warnings. Yet by 8 o'clock every corner between Amsterdam and Lenox looked different. Quieter, emptier, watchful. The shoeshine boys who usually set up at 7 were absent. The men who sold single cigarettes from coat pockets stayed inside. The women who carried brown paper bags full of policy slips to the bankers walked past the usual drop spots without pausing. Even the patrol cars rolling through seemed to sense it. They moved slower, windows up, radios low. Bumpy rose at 6 as always. He stood at the window of his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue, coffee black and hot in his hand, watching the street below come to life without its usual pulse. The bruise on his cheek had deepened overnight to a mottled plum. He touched it once, testing, not wincing, then set the cup down. Nat arrived at 7:30, coat still damp from the early mist. He carried no news, he didn't need to. The silence told its own story. "Corners are clean," Nat said, hanging his hat. "Not a single slip changed hands since yesterday afternoon. Runners are home. Bankers are waiting." Bumpy nodded. "Good." They sat at the small table near the window. Bumpy opened the private ledger, turned to a fresh page, began listing names in his careful hand. Not the players on the street, but the quiet ones. The barber on 135th who cut hair for free when a family was short. The deacon at Abyssinian who passed word without ever raising his voice. The widow on 141st who fed runners when they were hungry. These were the roots. These were what held the ground. Nat watched him write. "You're not calling meetings." "No meetings," Bumpy said. "Meetings make noise. Noise makes them think we're scared." "So we do what?" "We live," Bumpy answered. "Same as yesterday. Same as tomorrow. Until they can't." By noon, the first ripple reached Little Italy. Anthony and Joey, the 2 young collectors Tommy had sent, drove up in a gray Plymouth, windows down, radio off. They cruised 125th slow, eyes scanning sidewalks. No dice games in the alley behind the Apollo. No men leaning against lamp posts with folded newspapers hiding slips. No women stopping to chat with runners on corners. Just ordinary Harlem. People walking to work, children heading to school late, a few old men playing checkers on a stoop. Anthony frowned. Where's the action? Joey shrugged. Maybe lunch hour. They circled back an hour later. Same emptiness. A single runner, old Calvin, who usually worked the block between 126th and 127th, sat on a milk crate outside the barbershop reading a Bible. No slips in sight. No envelope ready. Anthony pulled to the curb, leaned out. Hey, old man. Where's the game today? Calvin looked up slow, eyes mild. Game? Ain't no game today, son. Slow week. Anthony's jaw tightened. Slow week don't mean shut down. Calvin closed the Bible, placed it careful on his knee. Tell that to the numbers. They ain't listening. Joey laughed once, short, nervous. You telling us Johnson shut it all down over one slap? Calvin regarded them both. I ain't telling you nothing. Just saying what is. Anthony stared a moment longer, then pulled away. They drove north, then south, then east. Same story every block. Closed. Quiet. Polite. Back on Mulberry Street by 4. Anthony stood in front of Tommy Russo, hat in hand. Nothing moving, he said. Not a dime. Corners empty. Runners sitting on stoops like it's Sunday. Tommy removed his glasses, polished them with a handkerchief. They're playing possum. Anthony shifted weight. Or they're really shut down. Tommy replaced the glasses. Then we open them. Vinny, leaning against the wall near the card table, spoke up. Let me take a crew. Shake a few bankers. Remind them who collects. Tommy considered it. Not yet. Costello wants clean. No bodies. No headlines. We give Johnson till Friday. If nothing moves by then. He let the sentence hang. Vinny smiled. Friday it is. Back in Harlem the silence thickened. Mrs. Clara Evans walked to the market on 135th, basket on her arm. She passed 3 young men she knew worked for Bumpy. Standing on the corner, hands in pockets, talking low. They nodded to her. She nodded back. No words. No need. Inside the grocer's, Mr. Esposito, the Italian owner who had run the store since before the war, stood behind the counter counting change. Clara set down her basket. Collards, salt pork, cornmeal. Quiet out there today, Esposito said, casual. Clara met his eyes. Always quiet when it needs to be. He rang up the total, slow. Heard there was trouble yesterday. Heard the same, she said. Esposito slid the change across. You tell Mr. Johnson. If he needs anything. Clara took the coins, placed them careful in her purse. He knows who his friends are. She left without another word. By evening the pressure had weight. Not loud weight. Not violent weight. The kind that settles in the chest and stays. In a back room on 131st, 3 bankers met without being summoned. They sat around a scarred table, ledgers closed, coffee cold. No one spoke for 10 minutes. Finally the oldest, Mr. Tate, spoke. They came by today, 2 of them, asking questions. The second banker, younger, rubbed his neck. Told them business slow. The third laughed without humor. They didn't like that answer. Mr. Tate leaned forward. They'll like tomorrow's less. No slips. No payout. No vig. Silence again. Then the younger one. Bumpy say anything? Mr. Tate shook his head. Don't need to. We know. They rose together. No handshake. Just a look, long, certain. Then they left separately, back into the night. Bumpy spent the evening walking. Not to inspect. Not to threaten. Just to be seen. He moved down 125th slow. Coat open. Brim low. People nodded. Some touched their hats. Children stopped playing to watch him pass. A woman on a stoop called soft. Evening, Mr. Johnson. He touched the brim in reply. At the Red Rooster, he stepped inside just long enough for the room to notice. Conversation paused. Eyes lifted. He ordered nothing, spoke to no one. Left after 2 minutes. The message was clear. The king was still walking his streets. Up on Sugar Hill, Madame Stephanie sat with 4 women in her parlor. Old, respected voices that carried without rising. They drank tea from china cups. They spoke of grandchildren, church, weather. Then, without transition, of loyalty. One woman said, "My boy asked if he should open tomorrow." Stephanie set her cup down. "Tell him no. Tell him the street decides when it opens." Another woman, "The Italians came by my daughter's place, asking why no numbers." Stephanie's eyes never wavered. "Tell her to smile. Tell her to say she don't know. Tell her Harlem thanks her." They left one by one. Each carried the same instruction. Keep still. By midnight the city felt different. Harlem had not erupted. It had contracted, tightened like a fist around nothing. And in that nothing, the Italians began to feel the squeeze. Vinny lay awake in his apartment off Bleecker, staring at the ceiling. The slap still lived in his palm, but now it felt smaller. He pictured Johnson's face again, calm, unreadable, and for the first time felt the edge of something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, doubt. Across the river Bumpy sat alone in the office on 126th. The lamp burned low. The ledger lay open. He wrote nothing new. He simply looked at the names already there. Then he closed the book. Outside, Harlem held. No guns drawn. No voices raised. Just pressure, slow, patient, inevitable. Building. Friday came without fanfare. The sky over Harlem hung low and gray, the kind of weather that makes every sound feel closer. No rain yet, just the promise of it. Streets stayed quiet in the same disciplined way they had all week. No runners, no slips, no numbers whispered on corners. The city above 110th had become a held breath, and the pressure in that breath had grown teeth. Vinny received the call at 9:10. Tommy Russo's voice on the line was calm, clipped. "No envelope, no runner, nothing. Go collect." Vinny smiled into the receiver. "How many boys?" "4. You, Anthony, Joey, and Frankie. Clean. In and out. Get the money or get the message across. No bodies unless he forces it." Vinny hung up, already reaching for his coat. They crossed the bridge in 2 cars, a black Cadillac and the gray Plymouth. Windows up, radio off. Vinny rode in the lead car, .38 heavy against his ribs, another piece strapped to his ankle. The slap still lived in his memory like a trophy. Today he would add the rest of the story. They parked on 126th, half a block from the building Bumpy used as office. No attempt at stealth. They wanted to be seen. For men in dark suits stepping out onto Harlem pavement drew eyes immediately, sharp, knowing eyes that did not blink. Vinny led. He walked straight to the stoop, up the steps, through the door that was never locked during business hours. The hallway smelled of coffee and old wood. At the end, the door to the back room stood ajar. Bumpy sat behind the desk. Alone. No Nat. No Junie. No muscle visible. Just the king, ledger open, pen in hand, looking up as though visitors were expected. Vinny stepped inside first. The other 3 fanned out behind him. Anthony to the left, Joey right, Frankie blocking the doorway. The room felt smaller with them in it. "Johnson," Vinny said, voice carrying the same Brooklyn edge from Monday. "Time's up." Bumpy set the pen down slow, closed the ledger with a soft snap, leaned back in the chair. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a faint shadow, almost gone. "Vinny," he said, quiet, polite, "you brought friends." Vinny's smile was thin. "Thought you might need convincing." Bumpy's eyes moved over the 4 men, slow, deliberate, taking in posture, hands, weapons. He saw the bulge under Vinny's left arm, saw Anthony's fingers flex near his hip, saw Joey's eyes dart to the window, saw Frankie shift weight, blocking escape. "You here for money?" Bumpy asked. 20%. Like we said. Bumpy nodded once. "And if there ain't 20%? Vinny stepped closer. "Then we take what's here. Or we take more." Bumpy regarded him. "You think there's something here to take?" Vinny laughed, short, hard. "You shut down the game. We shut you down." Bumpy's voice stayed even. "Game's been shut since Monday. You know that." "Yeah, we know." Vinny's hand drifted toward his coat. That's why we're here. Silence stretched. Thick. Heavy. Bumpy did not move. Vinny drew. The .38 came out smooth, years of practice in the motion. Barrel leveled at Bumpy's chest. Finger resting outside the trigger guard. Professional. Controlled. Anthony and Joey drew in the same breath. 2 more pistols, both pointed center mass. Frankie stayed at the door, hand on his piece, eyes on the hallway. Vinny spoke low. Stand up slow. Hands where I can see them. Bumpy remained seated. Vinny's voice hardened. I said stand up. Bumpy looked at the gun. Then at Vinny's face. Then back at the gun. You gonna use that? He asked. Soft. Almost curious. Vinny's jaw clenched. Give me a reason. Bumpy tilted his head just a fraction. You already gave me one. Monday. In the street. The room felt colder. Vinny stepped forward another pace. Barrel inches from Bumpy's chest now. You think I won't? Bumpy met his eyes. Held them. I think, Bumpy said. You already decided you would. Or you wouldn't be here. Vinny's finger slid inside the guard. Tension in the knuckle. Then the door behind Frankie opened. Not slammed. Opened. Nat Pettigrew stepped through, slow, deliberate. No gun in sight. Just Nat, coat open, hands loose at his sides. Behind him, more figures filled the hallway. Shadows mostly, but enough to know they were there. Runners. Bankers. Men who had waited all week in silence. Women too. Faces from stoops and windows, eyes steady. Frankie turned, hand on his weapon. Stopped when he saw the numbers. Nat spoke once. Quiet. You're surrounded, son. Vinny did not look back. Kept the gun on Bumpy. Bumpy spoke next. Lower it, Vinny. Vinny's breathing had shallowed. Sweat appeared at his temple. You think this changes anything? He said. We got more coming. Bumpy's voice stayed calm. Maybe. But right now it's just us. He rose then, slow, no sudden moves. Hands visible. Coat open. No reach for the .38 at his hip. Vinny tracked every inch. Bumpy stood straight. Looked past Vinny to the men behind him. Then back. You slapped me in the street, Bumpy said. In front of my people. You thought that would break something. Vinny's grip tightened. It didn't, Bumpy continued. It built something. The barrel trembled just once, barely. Every man and woman who saw that slap, Bumpy said. Every child who heard the story. They watched me take it, and they watched me stand. They decided what that meant. Not you. Not your bosses. Them. Vinny's eyes flicked to the doorway, to the faces staring back. Silent. Unmoving. Dozens now. More in the hall. More on the street below. Harlem. They decided, Bumpy said, that if the king can stand still when a hand crosses his face, then they can stand still when hands come asking for money. Vinny swallowed. And they stood still, Bumpy said. All week. No slips. No money. No fear. Just waiting. The gun stayed up. But the certainty in Vinny's face had cracked. Now you're here, Bumpy said. Gun in my face. Asking for what ain't moving. Vinny's voice came rough. Step aside, Johnson. Last chance. Bumpy took one step forward. Not aggressive. Not retreating. Just forward. The barrel pressed against his chest now. Cold metal through the shirt. Vinny's finger whitened on the trigger. Bumpy looked down at the gun. Then up at Vinny. You pull that, he said. And every man behind you dies today. Every man who sent you dies tomorrow. And the next day. And the day after. Because Harlem don't forget. And Harlem don't forgive public disrespect. Vinny's breathing rasped. But you don't pull it, Bumpy continued. And you walk out of here. You tell your people the game stays closed. The VIG stays 0. And the line stays where it's always been. 110th Street. The room held its breath. Vinny's eyes searched Bumpy's face. For fear, for bluff, for anything. He found nothing but calm. Deep, ancient, inevitable. The gun stayed cold. Vinny lowered it, slow, like a man lowering a weight he could no longer carry. Anthony and Joey followed, barrels dropping, eyes darting. Frankie stepped aside from the door. Vinny backed up one step, then another. Bumpy did not move to stop him. Vinny spoke once more, voice hoarse. "This ain't over." Bumpy nodded. "It never is." Vinny turned. The four men filed out. Slow, back straight, pride still clinging like smoke. The hallway parted for them. No hands reached. No words spoken. Just eyes watching them go. The door closed behind them. Silence returned. Bumpy sat again. Opened the ledger. Picked up the pen. Nat stepped inside. Closed the door soft. "They'll be back," Nat said. Bumpy wrote a single line, today's date, nothing else. "Maybe," he said. "But next time they'll knock." Outside, the first rain began. Soft, steady, washing the street clean. Harlem exhaled. The gun had stayed cold. And power, real power, had spoken without a sound. The rain that began Friday afternoon continued into Saturday, steady and soft, the kind that soaks through coats without drama. Harlem accepted it the way it had accepted the week, without complaint, without hurry. Streets glistened under streetlights. Stoops emptied early. Windows glowed warm against the gray. By Sunday morning the word had finished traveling. Not through newspapers, not through radio, through the oldest channels. Porch conversations, church pew whispers, the quick glance between neighbors carrying groceries. The story settled into place like sediment after floodwater recedes. They came for the money. They drew their guns. They left with nothing. And the king never raised his voice. In the pews of Abyssinian Baptist that Sunday, Reverend Pointer did not preach on the incident directly. He never did. Instead he spoke on Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 32. "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city." The congregation listened in the particular silence reserved for truth already known. When the amen rose at the end, it carried weight. Not loud, not showy, just complete. After service, men lingered on the steps in small groups. Women gathered near the side door with children at their skirts. No one asked questions. No one needed to. The answers lived in the way people carried themselves that morning. Shoulders a little straighter, eyes a little steadier. Down on 125th, the vendors returned. Not all at once. One by one. The peanut man set up first, then the woman with the iced sodas. By noon the corner near the Apollo looked almost ordinary again. Almost. The difference was subtle. Runners moved with purpose now, not caution. Bankers opened ledgers without glancing over shoulders. Slips changed hands under hats and in coat pockets. Quiet, efficient, resumed. The game had never been about fear. It had been about respect. And respect, once tested and held, returned stronger. Bumpy walked the avenue that afternoon. Coat open, brim low, paced the same unhurried rhythm. People greeted him the way they always had, nods, soft Mr. Johnsonâs, small touches to the hat. But today the greetings carried something extra. Not pity, not awe, gratitude, quiet, unspoken, deep. He stopped at the Red Rooster, stepped inside. The room paused just long enough for recognition, then resumed. He took his usual booth in the back. Ordered coffee, black, no sugar. Nat joined him 10 minutes later. Sat without asking. They drank in silence for a while. Word from downtown? Nat asked finally. Bumpy set the cup down. They're quiet. No cars on the bridge. No watchers on corners. Nat exhaled slow. They'll try again. Different way. Different faces. Maybe, Bumpy said. But not soon. They felt the weight this time. Nat looked at him, really looked. The bruise had vanished entirely. Only smooth skin remained. You never once reached for your piece, Nat said, almost wondering. Didn't need to, Bumpy answered. The street reached for me. They sat another minute. Then Nat spoke again, lower. The old women on Sugar Hill. They're telling their grandchildren the story. Not the slap. The part after. How you stood. How Harlem stood with you. Bumpy's eyes stayed on the window. Rain streaked the glass in slow lines. That's the part that lasts, he said. Across the river, the social club on Mulberry Street felt different that weekend. The air carried less laughter. Cards snapped quieter. Drinks stayed in glasses longer. Vinny sat alone at the round table Friday night, staring at nothing. Tommy Russo found him there at 2 in the morning. "You want to talk about it?" Tommy asked. Vinny shook his head once. Tommy sat anyway, poured 2 fingers of grappa, pushed 1 glass across. "You walked out," Tommy said. "Not accusation. Statement." Vinny looked up. "I's tired. Whole damn block was there. Women, old men, kids, watching, waiting." Tommy sipped. "Costello ain't happy." Vinny's laugh came dry. "Costello wasn't there." Tommy studied him. "You could have pulled the trigger." "I could have," Vinny said. "Then what? We start a war we can't finish? Over numbers we ain't even collecting anymore." Tommy leaned back. "We'll find another way." Vinny met his eyes. "There ain't another way. Not up there. Not anymore." Tommy said nothing for a long beat. Then, "You telling me Johnson won?" Vinny drained his glass. Set it down careful. "I'm telling you he didn't lose." The next morning Costello received the report in a private room above a restaurant on Mott Street. He listened without interruption. When Tommy finished, Costello lit a cigar. Smoked half of it in silence. Finally, "Pull back." Tommy blinked. "Sir." "Pull the cruise. No more collections north of 110th. For now." Tommy opened his mouth. Closed it. Costello exhaled smoke. "Some fights you don't win by fighting. You win by choosing when not to." He tapped ash into the tray. "Tell Vinny, good work." Tommy frowned. "Good work." "He delivered the message," Costello said. "Johnson delivered his. We heard both." The room stayed quiet after that. In Harlem, the ripples continued. Mrs. Clara Evans stood at her stove Monday evening, stirring greens. Her daughter sat at the table counting change from the week's laundry work. "Mama," the girl said, "they sang Mr. Johnson stared down for guns." Clara did not turn. "They sang a lot of things." The girl persisted. "They sang he never even flinched." Clara set the spoon down, turned, looked at her daughter, really looked. "He flinched once," she said. "Long time ago. Learned the cost. Never again." The girl waited. Clara returned to the stove. "Power ain't in the gun. Power's in knowing when the gun stays cold. And why." She stirred again. "That's what you remember. Not the slap. Not the guns. The why." On Edgecombe Avenue, Madame Stephanie sat in her parlor with the same 4 women from the week before. Tea steamed. China clinked. One woman spoke. "My grandson asked why we didn't fight back." Stephanie set her cup down. "Tell him we did." The women looked at her. "We fought," Stephanie said. "By standing still. By keeping our word. By remembering who we are when no one's watching." Another woman smiled, small, knowing. "He'll understand when he's older." Stephanie nodded. "He'll understand sooner than that. Because the street will teach him." Bumpy spent the evening alone in the office on 126th. Ledger closed. Lamp low. Radio off. He sat in the chair, hands folded, looking at the wall where a single photograph hung. Him and his wife, years earlier, smiling on a summer day. He did not smile now, but the calm remained. Outside, Harlem moved again. Not louder, not faster, just sure. Runners worked corners. Bankers counted slips. Women answered phones. Children played dice in alleys. Life resumed, not as before but better, stronger, because it had been tested. And in the testing, something permanent had been forged. Not fear of Bumpy Johnson. Not hatred of the Italians. Loyalty, earned in silence, proved in restraint, sealed in the memory of a gun that stayed cold. Years later, long after the rain had dried and the bruise had vanished forever, men would still speak of that week in low voices. Not with anger, not with pride, with respect. They would say, "He took the slap. He faced the guns. He never once raised his hand." And Harlem never forgot. Because real power does not shout. It stands. It waits. It remembers. And when it finally moves, it moves forever. Bumpy Johnson did not build an empire with bullets alone. He built it with the spaces between them. And those spaces, silent, controlled, inevitable, became his true legacy. Harlem knew it then. Harlem knows it still.